Hi, this is Craig Resnick coming to you from the ARC Advisory Group's 2021 Virtual Forum. With me today is my special guest, John Vicente, CTO of Stratus Technologies. How are you today, John?
I'm doing good, Craig. It's a day after the Super Bowl, and Tom Brady won his 7th Super Bowl, so feeling pretty good, even as a Patriots fan.
Absolutely, as a fellow Patriots fan, it's a little bittersweet. Wish he was here, but at the same time, we're certainly we're thrilled for his success.
Absolutely,
and certainly he and Gronk and certainly made the huge difference in the game. But
absolutely,
it certainly wasn't a game that kept us on the edge of our seat, though. And so certainly speaking of edge, and I think today we're probably going to talk a little bit about edge computing, and I know that's certainly particularly important for digital transformation, in this post-COVID era. And, we're constantly hearing about, these new disruptive technologies and how they're finding their way to the plant floor. So,
right.
What disruptive technologies do you see as having, let's say, the greatest effect on your customers, and how will Stratus Technologies respond?
Well, if you think about the technologies today, right? There's a number of technologies that are starting to find their way onto the plant floor. But when folks talk about disruptive technologies, you usually think about, bringing cloud computing, artificial intelligence, 5G or blockchain. Those are very disruptive. They're going to have an impact. But, one of the areas that I think is actually very interesting is, and not necessarily getting the headlines, is what I call system orchestration, IT, OT orchestration. Now, most people, when you think about orchestration, they're thinking about it in the context of cloud, telecommunications, or enterprise systems. And orchestration is about automation of lifecycle management services, whether it's applications, computing infrastructure, networking infrastructure, security, analytics, or managing data. Fundamentally, it can bring tremendous value to the factory floor, the plant. And that's really where convergence is happening, both in terms of IT usages and operational usages. I'm currently involved in the Open Process Automation Forum, and I co-chair the System Orchestration Committee with John Casey, who's the CTO for Seaplane AI. Right now, we're starting to focus in on the next revision. We're currently in version 2.1 that's going to be published shortly, but our next version of the spec, orchestration, is going to be sort of core to it. From the committee standpoint, system orchestration is actually one of the most popular ones in terms of participation by both IT and OT constituents. There's a clear recognition of the value that orchestration can bring to the process industry, Craig.
Yeah. You brought up certainly IT-OT convergence, and we certainly know how significant that is today. So what are the biggest challenges facing suppliers and end users, as this IT-OT convergence, takes hold in industrial and manufacturing environments, and how is your company helping to address it?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what's happening in this convergence space, frankly, there's many challenges. The one that I would bring up, and one that is very relevant to Stratus, is high availability, or HA is the acronym there. It's foundational. I mean, as we've seen in the IT world, in data center cloud, high availability is very relevant, but in the operational environment, downtime avoidance in manufacturing, mixed with the need for remote operations, HA is now even more critical. It's an area that we're seeing traditional suppliers, SCADA, DCS suppliers, challenged to migrate towards this converged architecture. If you think of the traditional legacy solutions, they require high availability, and it was facilitated through physical redundancy or hard coding application redundancy. But these environments are getting more complex, virtualized, containerized, and solving high availability or even fault tolerance becomes more complex, both at the node level, at the device level, as well as a distributed level. Stratus is world renowned for its high availability and fault tolerance technologies. And frankly, we stand alone in modernizing software and hardware-based HA and FT being fault tolerance. But as we've transformed our solutions from the data center and moved it to the edge, we are delivering the same superiority at the edge, with solutions are gaining wider traction with not only those suppliers that I mentioned, but also machine builders and even industrial end users. So we're pretty excited about the possibility of really addressing what I believe is a critical factor for convergence in the edge computing space.
Oh yeah, and you sometimes think of some of the other technologies that are involved with edge computing. It's sitting beside certainly Industry 4.0 technologies. You've got 5G, artificial intelligence, blockchain, augmented reality, virtual reality. So where do you see edge computing sitting against all that, all those other technologies?
Yeah, I don't separate those technologies from edge computing.
Okay.
Right. In my view, these technologies, they're foundational to scaling edge computing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in the same way we've seen advancements and if you think about in cloud, search technologies or virtualization made a major impact in terms of scaling cloud, mobile wireless computing, big data, all of these sort of what I consider to be core technologies help to scale what is centralized or cloud computing. What's common, inherently characteristic of these technologies that you referred to edge computing is they're based on decentralized architectures, mm-hmm. which is what edge computing is based, right? So 5G, unlike 3G or 4G LTE and even Wi-Fi, right? 5G is based on a decentralized communication infrastructure, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies. They aim to address complex distributed system problems, including security, transactional auditing, traceability problems. And of course, what is happening in the explosion of sensors, devices, and compute at the edge, it's bringing an extraordinary increase in new types of artificial intelligence usages at the edge, right? For real-time analytics, decision-making at the machine, process, or human in the field, right? So they're absolutely part of what will scale edge computing, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, we sometimes always try to think about at ARC, kind of what role edge will play and, as far as, kind of, and how it integrates with the future with all these technologies and businesses. So, where do you see these technologies helping to kind of scale edge computing, to kind of, I guess you could even say, hit a tipping point that we've seen for cloud?
I absolutely see edge computing reaching the scale of cloud computing, if not outdistancing it in terms of overall computing scale, right? When you look at the numbers and the volume and these technologies really are going to be what will unleash that tipping point for edge computing. They're not independent of edge computing. They're actually the enablers of edge computing. So, of course, it really depends where you draw the line between edge, enterprise, and cloud. But in my opinion, there's a whole lot more opportunity to instrument, process, and analyze the physical world as we know it today, at the manufacturing plant, the utility stations, smart buildings, logistics, cars, goods and supplies, instrumenting goods and supplies for, asset management or for the purposes of inventory, whatever it may be, machines, people, animals, agriculture. I mean, there's just a few, but at the end of the day, if you think about the edge, it's massive. And the ability to bring compute to that level and to that complexity is really, pretty exciting in terms of what's possible.
Oh, yeah. And, one of the things we certainly saw is how edge computing was so accelerated, by the pandemic and obviously right. The whole increase in working remotely, even trying to bring additional real-time visibility to the supply chain. So, as a final question, hopefully we'll be beyond this pandemic. We hit a herd immunity. Yeah. We've moved on. So where do you see edge computing going, post-pandemic?
Yeah, if frankly, we've taken a pause because of COVID, and perhaps some pent up demand there. I'm if you look at what's happening in broader industry, I actually see a lot more cloud to edge and edge to cloud usages and solutions over the next year. Mm-hmm. And frankly, the cloud service providers, the telco providers, are going to play a greater role, and that includes taking advantage of the scale and the modernization that we've been taking advantage of over the last 20 years, right? So I see many of the customers or suppliers starting to bring more of these cloud to edge and edge to cloud capabilities, and it's going to play a greater role in the transformation at the edge. Mm-hmm. From an IT perspective, again, we've been talking about software-defined technologies. You hear virtualization, containerization. I think that's going to continue to bring more value, more virtualized capabilities into the edge over the next year. Service management, we've talked about fault tolerance, high availability, system management. Edge analytics hasn't stopped. I think artificial intelligence, see more artificial intelligence capabilities starting to creep in. And of course, cybersecurity, these are the ones that have been playing roles in this convergence. These are the technologies that have been very, very relevant, and you're seeing more adoption here. But when you think about that pent up, right, that pent up demand, POCs were probably stifled. Production deployments, for obvious reasons, right? Physical presence and having to actually do these deployments, it requires the ability to bring people on site. So that probably didn't take off, but I envision that's going to take off tremendously. But again, we're at the early stages of edge computing, and I think 2021, 2022 we'll start to see that ramp that we saw very early in cloud computing. I think that's where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we certainly think as like the edge automated edge platforms, which are essentially going to be edge platforms, for people with an OT background that are pretty much self-service. You're very similar, like
right.
UTC, for example, that you don't have to be an R programmer or a Python programmer or have that strong IT background to really be able to fully deploy. And I think even looking down,
I think that's going to be critical.
Yeah. And I think as we go down the road, I can imagine, even as we talk a lot about IT/OT convergence today, I can certainly see it becoming, so as we talk about IT/OT fusion, at some point there may not even be a distinction between the groups, and that the systems, the people, they may all,
Yeah, I think that's where we want to be, right?
Exactly. Well, it was great having you here today, John, and glad we could catch up. Can't wait to talk to you again. We can check on Stratus Technologies' journey as it continues on with the edge, and hopefully we'll get to the post-pandemic point very soon.
Always good, Craig. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. And this is Craig Resnick coming to you from the 2021 ARC Advisory Group Virtual Forum. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.